All right, so the jury reached a verdict in the trial on the murder of the late rapper XXXTentacion. We're going to get into some of the details. I'm going to give you my thoughts. My name is Jamal Kersey. I am the principal attorney at Kersey Law, a boutique criminal defense firm in San Diego, California. And in this video, we're talking about the verdict which was reached in the trial regarding the murder of the late rapper XXXTentacion. And, you know, this is just another tragic death in our rap community. XXXTentacion was only 20 years old when he died. You know, he was on the come up. He was a rising star who they said, was really about to take off. I mean, he already had a pretty loyal cult following, but it sounds like, he was just about to take it to another level right before he died. And I'm not really familiar with his catalog. I've heard a couple of songs. Not really my thing, but that doesn't make this situation any less tragic. Talking about the incident, this actually took place on June 18th, 2018. And if you're wondering why it took so long to get to trial, generally speaking, on homicide cases, it is going to take at least a year, if not a couple years, to get to trial on these cases. A lot of times there's just a lot more evidence to go through than, say, your run-of-the-mill domestic violence or other type of assault case where, there's going to be a lot less discovery in those cases. In your homicide cases, you're usually going to have a lot more witness statements. You're going to have a lot more surveillance videos. There's just going to be a lot more evidence to review with your client. Then, you have the investigation. So, as a defense attorney, you're definitely going to want to have your investigator go out and get your own defense evidence. So in the form of taking photographs, visiting the scene, shooting video, reaching out to potential witnesses and the like. And that just takes time. It just takes time. And so generally speaking, it's going to take you longer to get to trial on one of those cases than just your run-of-the-mill DUI or any other type of case. The other thing to take into consideration is that we have COVID, right? And so COVID put the big pause on everything in the world, from travel to nightlife to restaurants to everything. But it also put a pause on courthouses, and having juries, right? So for a long time, you didn't have available jurors to sit for trials. It definitely threw a monkey wrench in the whole criminal justice system. And so that's the combination of it being a homicide case and COVID would be the main reasons why it's taken so long for them to get to trial. The defendants were Trayvon Newsome, Michael Boatwright, and Dedrick Williams. All right. And so Trayvon Newsome and Michael Boatwright were said to be the gunmen. And Michael Boatwright was the one who actually fired the fatal shot that killed XXXTentacion. Dedrick Williams was the getaway driver, and he was also said to be the mastermind behind the situation. It just kind of reminded me, because these guys were young. Michael Boatwright was only 28 years old. Trayvon Newsome was 24. And Dedrick Williams was only 26. So ranging from 24 to 28 years old, right? Mid to late 20s. I just kind of thought about where I was at in my mid to late 20s, finishing up law school, studying for the bar exam. And generally speaking, when you are in your mid to late 20s, you should be, either in school, you might still be working on your college degree. There's no shame in taking a little longer to get it done, right? But you might be in college, you might be in grad school, you might be working a job, you're an entrepreneur, you might be a videographer, anything you might be doing, you're working a job and making an honest living. In your mid to late 20s, you're having fun with ladies, you're getting out there and you're dating, you're going to the club, you're going to the bar, you're turning up, you're doing all these different type of things. You might be playing sports, you're learning new things, you're traveling, just enjoying life. But these three guys, and actually four, because you had Robert Allen as well, they were planning on robbing people. So the day before the incident took place, so on June 17th, they had rented a vehicle and their plan was to go around and rob people. And so it just happened to be by chance that they ended up recognizing XXXTentacion at this motorcycle shop. So they happened to go to this same shop because they were going to buy masks, right? So if you're planning on going around robbing people, it helps to not have your victims or other people be able to identify you. So you're going to buy masks. So they were going to buy masks and ended up seeing XXXTentacion there. They confirmed it was him. And so they end up going outside to wait for him in the parking lot. And before this even takes place, there was actual surveillance video of XXXTentacion going to the bank. He pulled out $50,000 and put it in a Louis Vuitton bag. He obviously ended up making it back to the motorcycle shop, but as he's getting ready to leave, that's when there's surveillance video that showed XXXTentacion in a BMW i8, and basically an SUV cuts him off, and basically parks perpendicular to the i8, and there's two gunmen that come out there. They have their faces covered, and XXX's passenger gets out of the car. He's, you see him running away, and then there's a visible struggle between these guys and XXXTentacion over this Louis Vuitton bag that, again, had the $50,000 in it. Unfortunately, Michael Boatwright shot XXX and he lost his life. Part of the evidence which makes this all the more difficult to sit with is the fact that there were videos of these guys dancing and, posing with the money just hours after the robbery and the murder. So any sort of thought that there might have been any remorse or feeling sorry about what they had just done or regretting what they had just done is really done away by this, dancing around and celebrating having got this lick. You just took a man's life. You just took money that he worked hard for. Even though it's entertainment, it's not the same as digging ditches for a living, but that's money that XXX earned. And he had a right to be able to, reap the fruit of his labor. One of the interesting aspects of this case and the investigation was the technology that they used to tie Boatwright, Newsome, and Williams to the location. So they used cell phone data to tie them to the location. So if you're not familiar, there is technology that will track which cell phone towers your phone is pinging off of. And in that way, they can then put you within a certain mile radius from that particular cell phone tower. A few years back, I represented a guy who was accused of having committed over 50 burglaries. And part of the evidence in that case were logs from these cell phone towers. The police were able to go back to this cell phone tower information and be able to say, okay, well, we estimated on this particular date at this time window, we're able to find that this guy's cell phone pinged off of this tower, which was, within a mile of the home in question. And so that's how they were able to connect my client and, his buddies to these different burglaries. So interesting use of technology to place somebody at the scene of a crime potentially. One of the arguments that the defense raised was a lack of DNA tying them to the shooting. And, oftentimes jurors are looking for that DNA evidence. And I think that's become a lot stronger of a desire based on some of the things that people see on CSI and the like. I can definitely tell you it is much easier in Hollywood or on CSI on TV to collect, preserve, and analyze DNA than it is in real life. Those type of shows just set an unreasonably high standard for DNA evidence. One of the other interesting arguments in this case was seeking to point to Drake in this. Sometimes your defense in a case is going to be that, there may have been somebody else responsible for the crime, but the detectives, either because they're lazy or because they're incompetent, failed to properly investigate the situation. And so if they had thoroughly investigated the case, then they would have found the other person who's really responsible, right? And because they didn't, they only ended up with your client And you're trying to emphasize that to show the sloppy police work. So you're trying to make the argument that there might be somebody else out there running around free who actually did this, but they have your guy because they failed to thoroughly investigate the case. And if you were following the Alex Murdaugh trial, that was another argument against SLED. So they were saying that SLED was really sloppy about a number of things, including not having looked into anybody else besides Alex. And so in this situation, they at a certain point, they actually wanted Drake to sit down for a deposition. So they wanted to question him under oath about his potential involvement in this situation. And really what it came down to was XXXTentacion, or somebody from his account, because I believe he had said that his Instagram account was hacked and there had been a post which had since been taken down, which basically said, hey, if I die, it was at Champagne Poppy, and that's his Instagram name. And so that's what led the defense to try and say, hey, Drake might have had something to do with it, but that was the only thing that even remotely would have tied Drake to this situation. On top of that, XXXTentacion had said, hey, somebody hacked my account. He took it down. So that's not going to be enough to be able to say that, hey, Drake should have been interviewed by police and the detectives in order to rule him out as a suspect. Again, there just really wasn't any legitimate evidence that would have linked Drake to this incident. And so Drake's legal team naturally fought against him being deposed, and he was able to avoid the deposition. Some of the most harmful evidence ultimately came in the form of testimony of Robert Allen. So Robert Allen was the fourth guy who was along with Boatwright, Newsome, and Williams in this situation. And Robert Allen had actually pled guilty earlier. So last year he pled guilty to second-degree murder, and he ultimately agreed to testify against his co-defendants. And with that, he's likely able to avoid spending the rest of his life in prison. There's still a chance that he could be sentenced to life, but he has the possibility, of avoiding a life sentence. The rest of these guys, there is a mandatory life sentence, so they will be in prison for the rest of their life, provided, they're not successful on appeal. But for Robert Allen, there's a strong possibility, just given the situation, that that he'll die in prison as well. But I think it is a very important thing to take into consideration when we're talking about snitch testimony. And I try and say on other videos that when it comes to snitches, it just, at the end of the day, is very difficult to combat what they have to say. Why? Because they were right there. Robert Allen was right in the car with these guys, probably in the planning stage, and knew everything that happened. So he was able to give a play-by-play of what happened in this incident. And you can try and go after them, calling them a snitch, saying that they're just testifying or just cooperating so that they can get a better deal. You can bring up their prior criminal history, which is what the defense attorneys in this case, they try to do. They try to bring up his prior felonies to attack his credibility. And, because the thought is, okay, well, you're a convicted felon, and therefore, nothing you say can be trusted. And, in this situation, or any situation where a snitch has been convicted of selling drugs, convicted of robbing people, committing check fraud, but at the end of the day, if he's saying, hey, I'm telling the truth about this situation, I was there, they were there, this is what went down, that is just hard to combat. Ultimately, the jurors, they deliberated for 8 days. So 8 days is a good amount of time to have a jury out reviewing a case like this, and to be honest with you, that's enough to have a prosecutor pretty nervous about their chances, right? They might be thinking that there's some sort of holdout juror, or they might end up, with a mistrial, a hung jury, or even a not guilty. They had a strong case, so they probably weren't that nervous. But for them to be deliberating 8 days, is different from you had in the Alex Murdaugh case. The jury came back in like 3 hours. So that's a huge difference between 3 hours and 8 days. But the jurors, they did their job. You know, you really like it when you have the jurors asking for readbacks of testimony, when they're asking to review evidence, because you know that they were really thinking and they really want to make sure that they get it right. And so when your client's facing life in prison, when they're facing decades in prison, even if they're facing 30 days in jail, you want to make sure that those jurors were listening attentively to the evidence, that they kept an open mind about the evidence, and that they're taking the job seriously and they're very interested in making sure that they get their verdict right. So there were over 1,000 text messages that they got a chance to see. There were pictures and videos. The jurors found these guys, all three of them, guilty. And they all face 3 mandatory life sentences. It's just tragic, not only for, you know, the death of XXXTentacion, and rest in peace to him. And, you know, my heart definitely goes out to his parents, his family, you know, the fans, his friends and loved ones. The other part of this that is really sad to me is, you know, these lives just thrown away, these 3 young men. And I saw this picture when I was looking at this article, and, you know, you see these guys and they could be anything, right? They could be college students. They could be interns, you know, Uber drivers, young entrepreneurs, grocery store clerks, maintenance men, whatever, anything, not defendants in a criminal case facing life in prison over, you know, your 4th cut of $50,000, you know, and you begin to think, like, where did things go wrong here? And that will likely end up being explored as they go into their sentencing. You know, there's probably not going to be a whole lot to discuss, simply because they're facing a mandatory life sentence. So it's not like their defense attorneys are going to be able to, you know, argue for less time. But if they were in a situation where they had the possibility to argue for less time, then we likely get to hear the story behind what led these young men to, you know, where they were at in life, to where on June 17th, 2018, instead of doing all those things we were talking about before, you know, clocking into work, getting ready to go out to, you know, go out to the bar, or planning to travel, or studying for a final exam, instead of doing those things, they're plotting to rent a car to rob people, which led to this situation where they take a young man's life over $50,000. There's always a story behind this situation. And we may or may not hear that at the sentencing hearing, but whatever it is, you know, for them to have, you know, essentially thrown their lives away at this point in this way is just tragic and sad. It's heartbreaking. Well, that's going to be it for this video. So if you got something out of it, please show me some love and hit the like button. Make sure you're subscribed to the channel and turn on those notifications so you never miss a new video when it drops. As always, I want to thank you so much for watching, and until next time, peace.